Distinguished guests, organisers of this splendid conference, teachers and colleagues, it's a great privilege not only to be here standing opening this conference, but also to be in the middle of a wonderful program of work that has gone on particularly for the last 10 years. The NIS initiative is inspiring, I think, for many of us, looking at how we might think about the challenges facing education systems around the globe. And there are many, many challenges in education systems. How do we think about the governance of our systems? How much public education? How much do we open up education systems to market forces? And some elements of that have been quite important to move away from an overly bureaucratic education system. But also we can see the consequences in some of our societies, that too much competition and too much market has actually meant that governments around the globe, worried about their education systems, don't necessarily have the level of control and steering of their education systems to deliver on important social qualities that education systems need to be able to deliver on. How do we pay our teachers and keep them in our education systems? Many systems around the world, UK and the United States particularly, but even some of the Scandinavian countries like Denmark, have major challenges, major issues maintaining their teachers in the education system. It's what's known as a leaky pipeline. At the same time, what we know, and there are many debates going on around this, what could and should our classrooms look like? Should they look like the classrooms of more than a century ago? Or should they look something different? Our chairperson today in opening up mentioned artificial intelligence, robotics, issues of sustainability. I could add on others, biodata, biogenetics. How do we use genomics to actually understand where children are? Do we use neuroscience, and so on? But what I want to focus on in my intervention is something that has become very apparent in education systems, and particularly those education systems that have, I would want to argue, enabled too much competition potentially and too much market into their education system. In other words, a government or a state that is doing its job is also oversighting the distribution of resources, of opportunities, of encouraging the best teachers with the best minds into our education systems. And what we have actually seen, and we have seen this particularly from 2008 onwards and the global financial crisis, is evidence of growing inequalities, not only across different countries, but particularly within countries. In the United Kingdom, we call those students who haven't done particularly well from this global competition or this national competition as cold spots. We actually have a name. Here we have a concentration of poor labour market experiences, few jobs, communities breaking down. We see major instances of violence and so on. And the job of the education system to produce greater degrees of social cohesion, a sense that we care and respect each other, is fundamentally a major, major challenge facing those systems. It's been sufficiently concerning to the OECD for them to begin to develop what they have called a global competence framework. And this global competence framework is not simply set of competences to race ahead, to engage in the 21st century, to be at the top of the race. But the global competence framework, I think very rightfully, is beginning to ask us to put our attention not just on the powerful knowledge that Professor Young has identified, but actually how we can develop powerfully socially competent individuals who see a responsibility to each other, to those who might be strangers in their midst, and to actually see the goal of producing a cohesive, caring society as also an important project of the school. I want to commend the OECD placing this into the PISA framework, which is the Program for International Student Assessment, which is a testing, a large-scale set of tests that are actually done on 15-year-olds as they're leaving school. The report looks rather like this. It's quite an extensive, engaging report, and it identifies 4 competences that it believes particularly should be at the heart of all of our schools that go forward into the future. Those competences include, and I'll just go back here, but those competences include interculturality. But here the OECD is particularly talking about cultures that come from abroad. Okay? And I actually want to raise a question about this, and we see this demonstrated to us in an excellent way here. In other words, Kazakhstan has embraced cultural diversity within the nation and not only from beyond the nation. It has prioritized 3 languages, and in doing so, what it's actually putting up right up front and center stage, that this is a nation and a new nation, but it values the cultural diversity from within and not just from without. The OECD's framework includes respect for others, and I think absolutely quite rightly it wants to insist this is absolutely a part of the way in which we think about the organizing of our schools, both now and into the future, and the relationships between the teacher and the learner. But the rise of big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on, raises interesting kinds of questions here when we think about the relationships that need to develop, and these are people-to-people relationships. We might live in a world of robots, but we will actually need more and more of our social and our political resources to actually understand what it means to live in a world, a robotic and artificial intelligence world, where people have to be and continue to be at the heart of that project. Appropriate interactions across cultures is, I believe, absolutely central. We do live in a global world, but I disagree with the OECD. Many parts of that global world are disconnected, even indeed in our cities. A city like London has major areas within London where young people do feel not connected to the global project, not connected to the distribution of wealth. They feel very deeply disconnected. So to connect up, to be globally connected, I believe means looking both inside and not just beyond to other parts of the world in a geographic sense. The 4th element concerns collective goods. And again, I endorse the OECD. I think it's absolutely correct. How do we share in the production of wealth? And here I'd actually want to foreground cultural wealth, fiscal wealth, relationship wealth, all of these different forms of wealth that enable us to nourish ourselves and to live in a way in which we are truly able to be the kind of powerful people that Professor Michael Young identified. But I see a problem, and I see a temptation. And the temptation is this. Okay? The PISA tests do arrange countries vertically, and it's what I call vertical vision. And while the OECD is saying it is not going to do this with the global competences, it also said that to a large extent around PISA. And I want to make a strong argument to all of you as educators and policymakers and movers and shakers in this world that this must not happen to global competences. We cut from under our feet the very project that would support this respect for others. We remove the possibility for respect for others when we place each other on a vertical scale where some will always be losers and some will always often be winners. I would want the cultural competences, the internal ones of Kazakhstan, not necessarily just the ones that look out and beyond the geographic border, to be prioritized as part of a conversation that shapes and forms the 21st century learner and the 21st century school. So my question here and my conclusion is it possible to listen to others and equalize relations when countries are placed in competition with others? My thought is no. How can we compare cultures, okay? Nations at different stages of their development, nations with different compositions, some more challenging than others, to do with ethnic and racial and gender and class diversity. In other words, I think if we look back over the last 20 to 30 years, one thing I think we have understood from the evidence, and this is a conference about research to practice, and this is a conference that actually ought to inform policy shaping practice, is that too much competition, too much vertical vision gets in the way of producing equity in education systems. So I would invite us to have a conversation as we move into the 21st century, if we want respect, dignity, sharing with others, that Kazakhstan particularly, as it has done over the last 10 to 26 years, to actually chart the way to generate a globally competent learner and teacher that has not a commitment to vertical vision, but has a commitment to respect, to solidarity, to sharing, to sustainability. Thank you.